Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, and we are continuing on with the Fawlty Towers reviews. We're now on episode 4, The Hotel Inspectors. Now, considering the setting of the show, you know that when the hotel has to get inspected, things are gonna go down. And we're right, but not in the manner we think. The plot begins like an average day at the hotel, and Basil learns from Sybil that one of her friends learned through this roundabout way that apparently there are 3 hotel inspectors in the town, so be on guard. Now, the thing with this is that a very OCD slash rude customer has checked in to the hotel. And at first, Basil's like, this guy's just rude. But then when he makes an offhand comment about in his line of work, he goes through multiple hotels and knows a thing or two about hotels, all because Basil refuses to book the TV for him, which, as I mentioned in my first Fawlty Towers review, is based off of one of the things that Mr. Sinclair did while the pythons are there. So, pull another thing, like, let's see what rude thing we can have Basil do. Basil's like, wait a minute. He's in town, asking me to do something that we don't normally do. And he says that in his line of work, he goes through hotels. The man must be a hotel inspector. So Basil starts to try to be on his best behavior. I mean, in the first episode, he was more on his best behavior and more kissing butt, but that's when he thought the guy was a lord. With this one, he's on his best behavior, but his fake best behavior is very obvious to us who have seen him through a couple episodes. Everyone around him, he's a little obnoxious, but he's trying, to kiss up to the guy. And of course, as the episode goes on, we, the audience, are like, this guy's probably not the hotel inspector. And by the end, we find out he's not a hotel inspector. He actually sells spoons. And of course, when Basil finds out, he's like... And then there's a second guest who's a bit more subtle in how he asks. It's more reasonable. We would like this type of wine this year. Basil gets it. It leads to one of my favorite moments in the entire episode. Basil cannot uncork a bottle of wine to save his life. And then when he finally gets it, he breaks the cork and it infects the wine. I guess the guy says the wine's been corked, which I've never heard of that term. But then again, I'm not a wine connoisseur. And I guess it affects the taste. At least the point when Basil tries it just to check, he's like, some good physical comedy there from John Cleese. And he goes and gets him the right bottle of wine. And it turns out this guy's not a hotel inspector either. And I love Basil when he finds out, you're not an inspector? And that guy's like, no, I don't have anything to do with it. Oh, thank you. And of course, the other guy does get a good comeuppance, but I'll talk about that later. Fun little thing about the wine corking scene I just mentioned is because of the nature of the fact it is a scene involving liquid being poured, and the nature of how sitcoms are shot, it was half scripted, half improv. The scripted part was, the events are going to happen, the wine's going to go one way, we got to react with how it goes, and the improv is react to whatever way the wine goes. So it was loosey-goosey. And watching that scene, you can kind of tell, like, there's not a lot of scripting going on here. It's like a very natural reaction, because it's them reacting in character. That's why that joke works. The rude customer, Mr. Hutchinson. The rude customer, Mr. Hutchinson, is played by Bernard Kibbins, who was in episodes of Doctor Who in the later years in the series. And of course, he was in Hitchcock's film Frenzy. He did a lot of other credits, those are just the ones that stand out. He plays his character to a T. In a dramatic film, you might say he's overacting a little bit, but if you watch people that are extreme OCD, they can kind of get like this. But I think it plays better in a comedy. Think like how Jack Nicholson was in, I think it was Something's Gotta Give was the name of the film, where he played the extreme OCD guy. Of course, there he was just downplaying it a little bit. He's just more obnoxious, just playing how he normally plays his characters. But was, in his physical stuff, like not stepping on the cracks and all that, and some other stuff with his characterization. Here, Bernard is, really playing up the stuff, raising his voice, projecting well. Definitely would work for theater and, of course, sitcoms, which sitcom, with how it's filmed, is kind of like the middle ground between film and theater. That's what I kind of like about the format. Well, he does end up getting physical with Basil before the end of the episode, which leads to a nice little bit of physical comedy near the end where John Cleese's Basil hits him with a couple pies. And there's a couple moments in this whole thing that lead up to that where I'm like, if I was Basil, I would have punched that guy in the face and saying he expects not to receive a bill. I could kind of understand his viewpoint there, but it's like, dude, you've been rude the entire time you were there. With how rude he is, if a customer like that was that rude at the casino, we probably would end up banning him. But it would also depend on what led up to the person being rude. But if he was just being rude and obnoxious the whole time like this guy was from the beginning, and then of course refusing to pay the bill on top of that, yeah, you're out of here. You're out. In later years, Bernard even said he loved the slapstick in the final scene. The one thing that worried him was he was afraid that John Cleese might actually hit him. And given how the scenes before that were filmed, I can kind of understand it, that he might get caught up in the moment and too in character and actually smack him once. But I think Cleese is enough of a professional to know that, like, let's just try to do it as is, and unless we come up with something good that we can kind of exchange with a look, or something accidentally happens, it's not dangerous, like what happened to poor Andrew Sachs in the previous episode, we'll roll with it. James Cossins plays Mr. Walt, who is the other fake inspector, and he does a pretty good job with it. More subdued. The only time he really shows a lot of emotion is when Basil really is confronting him at the end, like, "You're not? No, I have nothing to do with it." And he's a little freaked out, like, is this guy off his nut? Is this guy going down the river and meeting some guests in white coats? You can tell he was really afraid for his life. And then, of course, the ending when the actual inspectors show up. I love Cleese's reaction. A nice way to end it. That the whole episode, Basil was worried about the hotel inspectors. He had to deal with two fake ones. And then at the end, he has to now deal with the real ones. And he's all freaked out like, oh boy, where are we going to go from here? It's a very fun episode. I wouldn't put it in my favorite one, but it is a very fun episode. It's one that I remember the premise of it, but from the last time I marathon watched the show, I don't remember a lot about it specifically, other than maybe the guy being rude and the whole nothing to do with it. But now watching this, I'm like, I'm surprised I don't remember a lot of this. But it is very fun. I definitely recommend this episode. Kind of a moot point when there's only 12 episodes in the whole series, but I definitely recommend this as one you don't skip.